Let's go further with the change management approach. Here, we'll focus on the change categories from various perspectives, the change control process, and the stages involved in a change control process. Speaking of change, it's unavoidable nowadays. Even with well-planned projects, well-thought-out documentation, and clear milestones, changes can still occur. As a project progresses, new discoveries are made, different findings crop up, and some of the initial assumptions turn out to be only partially accurate or incomplete. The best approach is to anticipate change and plan everything ahead. That is where change control comes in handy. Change control is the process used to ensure that changes to a product or system are introduced in a controlled and coordinated manner. In other words, it refers to preparing, supporting, and successfully adopting changes for projects to be kept on track and moving forward. Change control is part of the change management discipline, which is defined as a structured approach to transitioning individuals, teams, and organizations from a current state to a desired future state. In case a change control process does not exist for an enterprise or organization, the business analysts work with concerned stakeholders to develop one. When business analysts develop a change control process, they determine the process for requesting changes, determine the elements of change request like cost and time estimates, benefits, risk, priority, and course of action, determine how the changes will be documented, determine who will perform impact analysis, and determine how the changes will be prioritized and communicated. For the solution design and development and testing phases, we discussed a bit about how a business analyst will approach changes during development. But as automation is a journey and processes are constantly evolving, most changes will emerge after the process is in production. There are multiple types of changes, depending on when they appear. Changes proposed for future automation, which include new initiatives or future changes on the process that have already been approved for automation. Changes occurring during automation development, which include requests that result from increasing the percentage of automation or gaps in the process definition document after it was validated and signed off. Finally, we have the changes that occur post-implementation, that is, before or after warranty. These include requests that result from increasing the percentage of automation, improvements to the existing automation, bug fixing, or gaps in the documentation discovered after go-live. From a process component perspective, changes can be categorized as input changes. These can be either a new input, the same input but in a different format, or the same input with a change in content and/or structure. Process changes. This category includes new steps that need to be added, existing steps that have to be removed, changes to the existing steps, or changes in the order of executing the existing steps. System changes, which can be represented by upgrades, new functionalities or modules, changes to the existing functions, or the decommissioning of an existing system or module. Lastly, there are output changes, covering new reports or dashboards, changes to existing reports, and new logs. The automation change control process represents the process of requesting, determining attainability, planning, implementing, and evaluating the changes to an automation process throughout the project lifecycle. It can be divided into the following stages: change request, change evaluation, change approval, prioritization, and implementation. Every change request needs to be documented, and every modification in the status of a change request needs to be updated in the traceability matrix. Let's now have a detailed look at the traceability matrix. It usually comes in the form of a spreadsheet that contains the end-to-end process and tracks the evolution of all the requirements, from the business ones to the test cases and the go-live phase. The requirements traceability matrix is bidirectional, as it enables us to follow the advancement of the requirements by examining the output of each deliverable and to trace back the business requirements of a certain product feature. The spreadsheet is very useful when it comes to business requirement versioning and project scope monitoring. The business analyst and the project manager are in charge of documenting the requirements traceability matrix throughout all the phases of the project. Let's look at some guidelines on how to create the document. Now, we need to identify exactly the elements that must be traced by listing all the deliverables and the high-level business requirements posed by the project. After that, we can proceed by splitting the high-level requirements into smaller parts and mapping the resulting items into the business rules and exception list. It's also crucial to update the status and changes brought to the requirements at all times to ensure that the entire team working on the project is in touch with the latest information. Finally, we need to make sure we analyze the results and update the project accordingly. Before we move on to what happens during each stage of change implementation and the elements of a change request, it's important to understand the governance process. A governance process identifies the decision makers, process, and information required for decisions to be made. A governance process describes how approvals and prioritization decisions are made for requirements and designs. Business analysts must plan and define the governance approach early on in their analysis and clarify any ambiguities within it. When planning the governance approach, business analysts identify how business analysis work will be approached and prioritized. What is the process for proposing a change to business analysis information? Who has the authority and responsibility to propose changes, and who should be involved in the change discussions? Who has the responsibility for analyzing change requests? Who has the authority to approve changes? And how changes will be documented and communicated. Now, let's see what happens during each stage of change implementation. The first step is to generate the change request. Normally, this can be initiated by process owners, process controllers, business analysts, automation support, a different business unit, or IT. Depending on which tools the company uses, they can be raised either via a ticketing app, intranet, SharePoint, or email. Regardless of the tool or system used, a change request should contain the following fields: project name, request ID, request owner, date, change description, reason, impact, proposed action, and status. The second step is change evaluation. It implies evaluating the change of scope and impact on the business process, documenting the associated risks along with the mitigation plans, and estimating the effort required for implementing the change. Questions that should be asked during this phase are there any existing requirements in conflict with the change? Are other processes affected? What is the impact of implementing the change? What are the consequences of not making the change? What are the risks that come from implementing the change? What is the effort to implement the change? What is the impact on the pipeline? The business analyst, along with other stakeholders like the implementation manager or project manager, process owner, solution architect, and automation developer, are responsible for change evaluation. Change categorization depends upon the standards defined by the enterprise. In case the categorization is not defined, the business analyst can work with the relevant stakeholders like project manager, domain SME, implementation SME, and decide upon the categories. At times, the existing standards can be tailored to meet specific needs. When evaluating changes, we can categorize them as follows. Standard change. This is defined as any new request that is different from the original requirements. For this type of change, no approval is required and can be performed by the automation developer. A standard change isn't a showstopper for go-live and does not have a significant negative impact on production. Also, this type of change can be included in the next automation release as a process improvement. Standard changes follow a streamlined process in which group-level or peer approval are not required. Typical examples of standard changes are changing the frequency of when the robot is running, rescheduling the robot, etc. Moving on, the implementation team may be faced with an emergency change, which is any change that is a showstopper for go-live or endangers the production environment. It needs priority treatment due to time pressure and has a different approval and implementation process compared to other changes. Examples are interface changes that have an impact on the execution of the workflow or a change in the design of the process, like from unattended to attended automation and vice versa. We can conclude with normal changes, which comprise any change that goes through a normal change approval process flow, meaning that it needs formal assessment. Any normal change where the workflow or any custom code needs to be modified should be deployed through the organization's release management process. A list of examples would include Windows updates, Outlook changes, automatically pushed patches, or upgrades to the core systems. Depending on the implementation effort, which is calculated in days, changes can be low, medium, or high, and it's typically up to the company to decide on the number of days for each category. Responses on change requests are usually provided by either the change approval board, which comprises of project manager, sponsor, solution architect, IT support, and business analyst, or the implementation team, which has business analysts, solution architects, and automation developers. The decisions that the change approval board or the implementation team can take based on their evaluation are: keep the existing functionality, remove the existing functionality, add a new functionality, or change an existing functionality. Once a decision is made, prioritization and implementation are next. We learned about the different change categories and the stages involved in the change control process. Next, we will learn about the responsibilities of a business analyst in the UAT phase of the automation implementation.